Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live show once again. I hope you had a great week and that we've been working on our values. Now we know our archetypes and we are on the same page. Today we are focusing on budgeting finances 101. So if you have any comments, you can comment in the comment section. If you have any question, you can also type in the comment section. We want to hear from you. So if you type in and that encourages us as well. A budget consists of income and expenses. In part one of the Budgeting Finances 101 presentation, we'll focus on managing your expenses, and next week we'll focus on growing your income. Tim, but do you have any news from this week for our viewers?
I do have news for our viewers, Tafadzwa. I think it was essentially a very good week. In the previous week, we were talking about a global sell-off, Tafadzwa. We were talking about how stock markets globally had gone down, and also stock markets in South Africa had also gone down. But the trend reversed in this week, and we also actually saw the rand, strengthening. I saw a headline in one of the business papers saying SA stocks surged to a fresh record on red cat bets, which is quite encouraging. So the first thing that I would want to talk about is the fact that the JSE is in record territory as we speak. So in the past week, we have seen the South African stock market rise to a record level. And the reason why it has risen to a record level, it's because many people are expecting a rate cut, an interest rate cut from September going onwards. But there is also a pattern that we've seen, Tafadzwa, not only in South Africa, but globally. And so historically, the South African shares have performed well following elections. And what we're seeing is increased optimism following the government of national unity. And that has really boosted investor sentiment, because many investors are looking at South Africa as a business-friendly destination. And the trend is also applied in the US, where we have seen most of the stock market indices going up. So what is the one point that we're trying to communicate in this particular news item? The item that we're trying to communicate is that don't be faced with the ups and downs in the stock market. So yes, last week we were talking about a global sell-off and how people were panicking and sometimes exiting the stock market. Now we're talking about a recovery, and we're talking about stock markets in record territory. That is the nature of the stock market. What we need to do is to stay invested, stay diversified, and protect our portfolios. And Tafadzwa, as you will tell our viewers today, we'll talk about our book of the week. And the title of our book of the week is Just Keep Buying. So as you have extra cash, just keep buying. Don't attempt to time the market. Don't be affected by the panic that sometimes happens. Just keep buying. And we'll talk later on about that book. The second thing that I would want to talk about, and I saw this article in one of the media papers, they were talking about the possibility of, in fact, in all likelihood, fuel prices are going to come down in September. And so the article went something like this, that fuel prices in South Africa are expected to drop for the fourth consecutive month. And this is what the Automobile Association is predicting. And the reason why that is going to be the case, it's essentially because of the strengthening rand, which is driving the lower fuel prices. So what is it that we advise our audience to do following this news? Don't adjust your expenditure. If you find yourself with any savings, just keep buying stocks, just keep buying assets, income producing assets. And if you find yourself with extra money, which may not be the case because we did highlight last week that most households in South Africa are actually stressed. So use this good news that will happen to actually generate savings to pay off your debt. So if there is any area that we must prioritize, it is the area of lowering our debt. The third thing that I would want to talk about is an article that I saw from one of the business papers here. And this is advice that is coming from the Ombud for Financial Services in South Africa. Think of an Ombud as a regulator and an arbiter. So what happens in South Africa is if as a consumer, you would want to complain against a financial institution, there are different ombuds that have been appointed by the government to adjudicate on some of these complaints. So the ombuds for financial services, his name is Mr. John Simpson. He actually advised consumers not to trust financial advisors absolutely. So he's basically saying he's looking at some of the complaints that are coming on his desk, and this guy receives quite a number of complaints. And his advice is that as a consumer, don't place absolute trust in your financial advisors. There have been horror stories of financial advisors stealing from consumers. So there are two things that I would want to mention there, just to comment on this article. Point number one, obviously, to the extent to which you are limited, you need financial advisors. Financial advisors play a very key role because they are experts. They are definitely experts. So I'm not necessarily saying don't rely on financial advice. I get financial advice myself. What we need to do is to make sure that the advisors who are advising us are certified. In other words, they are registered with the regulators in the various territories that you may be listening from. So that's the first thing that we say. The second thing that we're saying, which is also something that Mr. Simpson pointed out, is that educate yourself. Because some of these financial products are complex, it's very, very important that you educate yourself. But also, as you receive this advice, be mindful of conflicts of interest. It turns out, particularly in the financial services space, that some of these advisors may be conflicted. And therefore, there is always the possibility that they may be promoting products from a particular financial institution, or they may be paid based on bonuses. And as a consumer, you may not be aware of that. So be alive to conflict of interest, but also it's very, very important to educate yourself. The last thing that I would want to talk about, so far, Tafazo, I've been talking about, let's just call them good news stories. But this one is not so much of a good news story. The Central Statistical Office in South Africa published the unemployment rate. And it turned out that the unemployment rate has actually risen to a 2-year high. So South Africa's unemployment rate unexpectedly rose in the second quarter to the highest level since 2022. And this was driven mainly by job losses in the agricultural sector and also in the trade sector. So the unemployment rate stands at 33.5% at the moment. Previously, it was 32.9, so it increased slightly. So at the moment, there are about 8.4 million unemployed people in South Africa, which is one of the highest jobless rates in the whole world. So what is my comment on this? Two comments that I have on this. The first comment that I have, and this comment is directed mainly to our young people who are studying. It's very, very important that you study in areas that will enable you to be equipped with skills for the future. What I find most of the time is that um, sometimes, particularly among the youth, it's not as if there are no jobs, but people are being prepared for jobs that no longer exist. So it becomes very, very important that as you make those career choices, you are mindful of what areas you need to be skilled in so that you can prepare yourself for the future work environment. We've been talking about artificial intelligence. We've been talking about data analytics. That's sort of where the world is going. So I'm just highlighting those areas only, not that they're the only areas, but it becomes very, very important that we equip ourselves with skills for the future and also skills that industry needs. My second comment is that there is no guarantee, particularly if you're a young person in this day and age, that you will get a job. So it's always helpful to, again, equip yourself with entrepreneurial skills. Very, very important. In my view, regardless of the career that you would want to pursue, I think it must be compulsory to learn investment skills, to understand how financial markets work, so that if the job that you've been trained for does not materialize, at least you can sustain yourself through investment income and through other skills that you would have learned, particularly money-related skills. And that's my view there. So, Tafadzo, let me stop there. I think most of my updates are South African specific, at least for this week. And the long and short of it is that there is positive investor sentiments. There is a possibility in September of interest rates going down. There is also a possibility of fuel prices coming down. If that materializes, use that extra income to pay off your debts. Over to you, Tafadzo.
Thank you for that insight. Our book of the week is Just Keep Buying, Proven Ways to Save Money and Build Your Wealth by Nick McGill, a top finance blogger who is the author of dollarsandData.com, a blog focused on intersection of data and personal finance. Mr. McGill is also the Chief Operating Officer and Data Scientist at Rethos Wealth Management. What are some of the lessons that you have learned from this book, Themba?
Lots of lessons that I have learned. So some of the books that we've been presenting in previous episodes are books that I would have downloaded from the internet, and I would be reading them either virtually or in PDF form. But I've had to buy this book, and I actually have a physical copy. I don't know if you can see it, Tafadzo, or if our audience can actually see it. And I've been going through this book. It's a very, very interesting book. Tafadzo, the name of this person, particularly his second name, is very difficult to pronounce, but it's Maguli. Maguli. The one thing that I liked about this book by Nick is a very popular finance blogger in America. there are three things that I liked about this book. The first thing that I liked is that most of his arguments that he's making around finances is actually supported by evidence. And I will ask you one question, which I found interesting. I will ask you that question. I know sometimes I put you on the spot, Tafadzo, and I will put you on the spot again by asking you one question, which he tries to answer in his book. But when he responds to some of these big finance questions, he is actually supporting his answers with the data. Nick is a data scientist. In your introduction, Tafadzo, you pointed out the fact that he's the chief operating officer of an asset management company, but he's also the chief data scientist in that particular company. So the one thing that I appreciated about this book is that most of his arguments are evidence-based. And I'll tell you something that he says, particularly when I come to the thought of the day. So that's the one thing that that I liked about this book. The second thing that I liked about this book is that it's easy to follow. He's actually arranged this book according to topics. He divided the book into two. The one section of the book is talking about saving. The other section of the book is talking about investing. And what he says is that depending on where you are on your financial education journey, just look at the topic that are relevant to you. So initially, when I went through this book, because I've got a particular interest in investing, I just went straight to the second section, to the second section of the book, which talks mainly about investing. And so what you'll find about this book is that it's arranged in, based on topics that are easy to follow. For example, if I look at some of the topics under savings, he starts by talking about how much should you save, how to save more, how to spend money guilty-free, how much lifestyle creep is okay, should you ever go into debt. So what he does is that he tries in this book to answer the big questions when it comes to money. And then when it comes to investing, why should you invest? It's a particular chapter on its own. What should you invest in? Why should you buy individual stocks? How soon should you invest? Where should you invest? So he then goes on to talk about all of those things. So I appreciated the fact that it's evidence-based. I appreciated the fact that it's written in such a way that you don't waste time. You just go to a topic that you are interested in. The one other thing that I appreciated, the last thing that I appreciated with this book is that he dispels certain well-known myths about personal finances. He talks about certain lies that people have told around personal finances. So let me just focus on one of those, lies, Tafadzo. And probably I will talk about, I'm not talking about lies as such, but these are things that the media keeps on talking about when it comes to personal finances. But, people continue repeating these things without supporting themselves with evidence, with the data. So let me ask you one question, Tafadzo, which I found very, very interesting in this book. Let me ask the question like this. It's a question I'm putting you on the spot, but this topic that I'm talking about comes under a subject that he calls the biggest lie in personal finances. And let me ask you the question, Tafadzo. Why do the poor stay poor? Why do the poor stay poor? What do you think, Tafadzo? From what you have read, from how you have educated yourself around financial education, Why do the poor stay poor?
I almost wanted to say because the Bible says the poor will always be amongst us, but
I guess the question, Tafatso, is why will the poor always be amongst us? Because if Jesus said that, then that's something that will always forever be true. But we need to answer the question using data. Why will the poor always be amongst us? There must be a reason.
I think it's we've been talking about money and values and our habits. So I think my mindset, the values and habits like not following budgeting. When you get the money, you are not in control. And also their perception about money. There's some people who actually believe that is their portion to struggle. Money is not for them. Yet they will also say you attract money and you cannot attract something that you don't value. So your perception about money contributes a lot in how you grow your income. And before I just hand it over to you, Nyaradzi was asking, he commented that it sounds like a very good book. Where in South Africa can we get a copy?
So I got my copy from Exclusive Books. I was on a trip somewhere. So as I normally do, I get a copy to read on the plane. So I was on a 12-hour journey and I was able to finish this book. So I got my copy from Exclusive Books. If I look at my copy, the copy that I have here, it actually cost me 399 rands. So this book costs 399 rands. You'll get it from Exclusive Books. But just to answer that question, Tafatso, the author, Nick, references an article by researchers from the London School of Economics. So you can actually Google London School of Economics research article, why do the poor stay poor? I'm not going to go through the article, but there are two things that he says there, which I found very interesting. He actually says that the poor do not stay poor because they are not talented, because they lack motivation. They don't stay poor even because they don't have values around finances. Some of them actually have values around finances. Some of them actually desire to be rich. But the article actually says they stay poor because they are continuing to work in low-paying jobs that they must work to survive. Imagine if the rest of your life, because you don't have money, you get a job that you are working for 14 hours a day, and that job is a low-paying job, and you need the income to survive. The researchers refer to that as the poverty trap. So the poor stay poor because they are in a poverty trap. Sometimes imagine somebody who is born in a very poor environment. They may be talented, they may want to break out of this poverty cycle, but that they can't. So the argument that he is making, and this is something that the researcher actually found out, if those poor people are actually given a sum of money or an initial capital, which they can then utilize to break free from that poverty trap, they can actually join the rich, right? So what the poor need for them not to stay poor is not necessarily to work hard. It's not necessarily to cut on their expenses, but they just need a break. And when they need that break, they are able to escape the poverty trap. Let me take this opportunity to just comment, and I want to make three comments here. because I don't want to make emotional arguments that are not evidence-based. Part of what we would want to do on this channel is to support all our arguments based on research data, right? So the first thing that I want to make clear, we'll be talking about budgeting 101 today. You're not going to get rich by cutting your expenses or by budgeting. It does not matter how good you become, in budgeting, you will never escape the poverty trap that way. For you to escape the poverty trap, you would need to focus on growing income. So we've split our budgeting finance 101 into two parts. In this part, we'll be talking about cutting your expenses. But let's just be very clear. Cutting your expenses will not make you rich. One of the things that comes out quite clearly from research articles, and this guy makes the same argument. If you look at the budget of a poor person, most of their expenses are on basic needs. So the poor actually spend the lowest, in fact, I'm quoting from the book now, the lowest 20% of earners spend more than they earn, and they are spending on basic necessities. So the reason why I'm saying this is that we need to take this into account before we even talk about budgeting. Most poor people, all their money is spent on basic necessities. And sometimes when you tell that person budget and do this, the most realistic thing is for them to grow their income. So that's the first comment that I would want to make then. The second comment that I would want to make is that, sometimes I hear stories and I hear this from preachers. Sometimes you get a pastor who is rich and they are beginning to lecture people on personal finances and how you need to believe God in terms of God will bless you. But then if you look at how they got rich sometimes, it was essentially they had an initial sum of money, whether that sum of money was from the church, and they broke free from the poverty trap, so to speak. And then they were able to invest in a number of things. And then they go to the poor with this message of, do this, but what they don't tell people is that they had an initial sum of money which they got when people made contributions to them, and they used that sum of money to make investments in various areas, and they were able to escape the poverty trap, and that's why they are rich. And sometimes the congregation that they are preaching to, in some cases, not in all cases, in some cases, is actually a poor congregation. And this congregation buys that particular story. But over time, you'll actually see that the congregation is not making progress themselves in spite of the prosperity preaching. So to that extent, we actually need to be realistic in terms of the realities of poor people and how we should position this message of budgeting to poor people. The long and short of it is that, and this is the argument that is being made in the book, and I found it very interesting, and I'll capture that in my thought of the day. So maybe let's move on to the thought of the day. I've extracted this statement from the book, and Nick says, savings matter early in life. Investments dominate later in life. Regardless of where you are in your financial journey, your focus should shift from your savings to your investments as you age. And there is one comment that I would want to make on that then. Think of financial management as a topic that can be split into two: savings and investments. When you are beginning on this journey, the initial focus should be on savings. And then as you progress on that journey, as you age, the focus should be on investments. right? It's just that clear. So today we'll be talking about budgeting. Budgeting depends on where you are. Budgeting is very important, particularly for people who are starting early on their financial management journey. For people with limited resources, think of budgeting as a financial tool that you use to manage scarce resources. So if there is a group of people that need budgets more than most, it's those people that are poor, that have got limited resources. Imagine a person who is rich, and I'm just picking names here that are coming to my mind. Imagine a Patrice Motsepe, for example. Tafazo, do you think that Patrice Motsepe has got a budget for his household income? What do you think? Do you think Patrice Motsepe has got a budget and he says to his wife, we shouldn't spend so much on chicken, we must watch this spending on electricity? What do you think?
I think for household issues, he might not have. Maybe he just gives them maybe 100,000 is for the month for whatever you want to use. Then, yeah.
You're totally spot on. So Patrice has escaped the poverty trap. So for people that haven't escaped the poverty trap, budgeting is very, very important. And the initial focus should be on savings. Right, very, very important. I'll talk about other things later on as we continue talking about, budgeting. But that's the point that I would want to say, and that point comes straight from the book. Imagine you are a young person who is graduating from school. Your pocket money is limited. You need a budget. Those are the people that need budget more than the most. I came across a petrol attendant who says, my money is very little. I can't even budget it. If your money is very little, you need a budget more than anybody else. If you are swimming in debt, you need a budget more than anybody else, right? That's the first point that we would want to say. So savings matter early in your life. Savings matter, particularly if you are still trapped in the poverty trap, as he said, which is why Tafazo, we're very, very passionate about financial independence. Financial independence is all about liberating people from this poverty trap. And sometimes I hear arguments from people like, why are you talking about finances? When you are a Christian, shouldn't you be focusing much more than on spiritual matters? No. Many people are trapped in poverty, and poverty is actually a real thing. There is something. That's why the poor stay poor, right? You will preach the gospel. As you preach the gospel to the poor, you also need to give them tools to escape that poverty trap so that they experience some form of financial freedom and liberty. That's what we are all about, and that's why we do all of what we do. Let me just give you another thought that I got from the book. Nick says the most consistent way to get rich is to grow your income and invest in income producing assets. If you want to save more, the main point is to tighten up where you can, then focus on increasing your income. Now, why are we spending time talking about Nick's writings? We're spending time before we talk about budgeting, because there must be a philosophy that informs your budgeting. Budgets are constructed from a certain philosophy. And the philosophy that should inform your budgeting is, number one, I would want to escape from the poverty trap. Number two, if my income is very limited, I want an objective to save more. And the reason why I want to save more is so that I can then invest in income producing assets. That's the philosophy that informs, the budgeting. We'll talk about budgeting methods, later on. You don't just, budgeting is not just a number crunching exercise. Let's just be very clear about that. There is a philosophy And I refer to that concept as reverse budgeting. So later on, I will talk about 3 methods of budgeting. There is a traditional way of budgeting. There is reverse budgeting. Then there is zero-based budgeting. Those are the budgeting methods that I would want to talk about. But at this stage of the presentation, I would want to make it clear that there must be a particular goal, a particular philosophy, and a particular thinking that informs your budgeting. The more scarce money is in your household, the more you are in debt, the more you have not built an emergency fund, the more you need to stick to a budget, and the more you need to be very particular about every rand that comes your way. You need to save, you need to have this mentality of saving and this discipline of saving, because that's very, very important. But also, it's very important that that discipline is inculcated in young people along their journey. The starting point is always saving. Even if somebody is growing in a very rich household, I would want the children in this household to be introduced to the concept of a saving jar, where they accumulate coins and they put them, because that's how our financial journey starts. The financial journey focuses on savings. Then we embed that discipline of saving. Then once we embed that, we then focus on growing assets once that discipline is embedded. You can't just talk to people about investing first. It's savings. Then we talk about investing. Over to you, Tafadzwa.
Before we go to the next question, I wanted to ask regarding not having a budget, the more money you have, does that only apply to households? And if so, why do organizations value budgeting if it's maybe about the amount of money or the level of wealth that you have?
Right. So that's a very, very good question, Tafadzwa. The way I would want to answer your question is to just throw out some stats out there. And these statistics come from a survey that was done in America, right? So let me just give you those statistics. So these statistics are not coming from Africa. 93% of people believe that having a budget is necessary. So people were surveyed in America. An overwhelming majority believe that a budget is necessary. So let's just start from there. Everyone, rich, poor, trapped in poverty, financial independence, need a budget. But then the reasons for having a budget will differ, right? So the top 3 reasons that were given for people to have a budget was, number 1, to better manage money. So when you are starting on your financial journey, you are a young person, you have never handled money. The reason why you are budgeting is to better manage money, right? So that you can handle money. And then another reason for having a budget is to get out of debt. It normally happens that sometimes you know how to manage money, but because you have to acquire assets, you find yourself in debt and you need a plan to get out of debt. A budget will help you. So if you are part of the middle class, say you are in your mid-30s, you are in your mid-40s, you've got a very big house, you've got a car, you're overly indebted, you still need to budget. You know how to handle money, but the reason for your budget is mainly to get out of debt so that you've got a plan. Then another reason is to plan for retirement. The long and short of it, Tafadzwa, is that even billionaires, particularly in their investment portfolios, they also have budgets. But that budget is not so much on the expenses side. That budget is focused mainly on the revenue side or on the income side. So the point that I'm highlighting is that everyone needs a budget. Let's just be very, very clear. But the reasons for preparing a budget along that financial journey will vary depending on where you are. And I must mention this because it's very, very important. A budget is a financial tool. It's a financial tool that will help us to reach our objective. On this particular, I don't want to call it a channel. Tafadzo, you let me know what is the best word for it. But on this particular channel, we encourage people to have financial goals. But for you to achieve your financial goals, you will need a budget, right? So that's why 68% of the people agree that having a budget will help them reach personal goals. So as long as you've got financial goals, you will need a budget. And then 60% of the people have a written budget plan. So don't tell me that my budget is in my head. You will need a budget. And the most common way of documenting that budget is a spreadsheet. So of the surveys that have been, had, many people actually have a spreadsheet. Although we also need to cater for the tech savvy. What I find is that some banks, some progressive banks have actually come up with budgeting apps. So one of the things that we would want to recommend to everyone who is listening to us today, if you have not learned to be in control of your money, there are a number of bank budgeting apps or tools that are being designed, and we'll recommend two of them. These apps will help you to track your expenses, and that becomes very, very important. So when I gave you the Patrice Motsepe example, Tafadzo, my point there was looking at expenses and income. If you are poor, the focus should be on managing your expenses so that you can create that initial sum. Remember what we said. Poor people are trapped in a poverty trap. And what they need to escape that poverty trap is a lump sum of money. And as you look at that research article from the London School of Economics, Why Do the Poor Stay Poor? They actually did an experiment with poor women in, I think it was in Bangladesh, where they gave them an initial sum of capital. I think it was cattle, and that initial sum, particularly among the hardworking people there, enabled people to escape from this poverty trap. So the reason why you would want to balance your expenses, even when you're starting, is so that you may create that. Imagine if you are Patrice's son. I don't know how they run their household, but I would imagine that Patrice's son will inherit the wealth that he has. He's not going to be trapped in poverty, right? He's not going to be trapped in poverty because the family has escaped the poverty trap. And that becomes very, very important. So his sons or his daughters can only improve from where he have left. And so the most important thing is to escape that poverty trap because that's very important. I hope, Tafadzo, I have answered your question.
Thank you. I think you've answered. And Mnyaradzzi says this is a platform, not a channel. Thank you, Mnyaradzzi, for that. What is the first step in budgeting 101?
That's a very interesting question, Tafadzo. But before I answer that question, let me throw it back to you. What do you think is the first step in budgeting 101 from what we've discussed so far? Sorry for putting you on the spot, Tafadzo. I enjoy putting people on the spot.
The first step in budgeting is to have the reasons why you want to budget.
The first step would be,
You should know the reasons why you want to budget.
right. So let's just talk about 3 steps in budgeting 101. Step number 1, set your financial goals. It's very, very important. Before you even start budgeting, don't budget in a meaningless way. I've seen people who budget in a meaningless way, and even the savings that they get after being on this journey of managing their finances, they plunder in other ways. So the first thing in budgeting 101, which is part of this method that I spoke about, which I refer to as reverse budgeting, right? Some people will introduce you to different budgeting methods. Tafadzo, my one way of budgeting as part of step 1 is a method that I call reverse budgeting, right? So this is how reverse budgeting works. Set a goal of, maybe you are starting on this journey. Let's just imagine that you are part of this poverty trap that I was talking about. Set a goal. That goal could be a 5-year goal. I normally say to people, set a financial, a 5-year goal, a longer term goal. So that longer term goal could be, I want to be financially independent in 5 years, right? Then when you allocate, so a budget is also a prioritization mechanism. So we've defined a budget as a financial tool to enable you to reach your goals. We are now also defining a budget as a prioritization mechanism. Let's just be honest, Tafadzo. If I look at your budget and if I look at the way you are spending your money, I can almost tell you where your priorities are. So your budget is your statement of intent in terms of where your priorities lie. But the first step in budgeting 101 is set your goals. And in setting your goals, you apply a method called paying yourself first. So there is a philosophy of paying myself first. I'm the person who needs to come out of this poverty trap. And therefore, I need to pay myself first. Paying myself first means I prioritize my goals. I prioritize savings. I prioritize all these goals that will enable me to escape that poverty trap overspending, right? So what it basically means that the scarce resources that come my way, the way I prioritize them is informed by my goals, right? And that's basically what reverse budgeting. Reverse budgeting is basically a term that I have coined. It simply means that start from the future in terms of where you are going, right? And then your goals will list certain priorities. We've been talking about a number of priorities, Tafadzo. Priorities such as savings, priorities such as getting rid of debt, priorities such as building an emergency fund. I know of people that budget very well. They do traditional budgeting. They just budget their money as it comes, and they budget according to spending categories. Have you ever gone to a bank, Tafadzo, and then you ask them for a budget, and then they just give you a spreadsheet that has got budget categories, and then you just budget according, that kind of budgeting does not excite me. I like a kind of budgeting that takes me somewhere. I work backwards from my goals, and I incorporate in my budgeting something that is consistent with paying myself first, right? So here is how I do budgeting, Tafadzo, in terms of my priorities. If I get 100 rands, which I have to budget, for example, without fail, the 10 rands goes to tithing, right? No questions asked about that. The second 10 rands goes to savings. So even when you are stressed, even when you are in a poverty, you are in a poverty trap, save at least 10%. Live below your means to the extent possible. Now, I'm mindful of the fact that if you are in a poverty trap, remember what I said, right? What I said is that the poor, if you look at the budget of poor people, they are not spending their budget on luxuries. They are spending their budget on necessities, right? Even though you are spending your budget on necessities, I would still want you to create some surplus. I don't want you to borrow. I want you to create this capital sum. Even if this method does not work in your lifetime, at least teach it to your children. So that's the first step in budgeting 101, right? The second step in budgeting 101, remember you're doing a budget, is to document how your money has been spent in the past, right? How has your money been spent in the past? What can you learn from that, right? So I normally start by, especially if I'm giving this advice to young people or people that are not well versed with budgeting, I advise them to start by tracking their income and expenses for 30 days to get a full picture of how they spend their money. Because what sometimes happens is that before you implement budgeting in your life, you have had bad habits that you have acquired over time. I don't want your budget that you are going to do in the future to be, not to be informed by lessons from the past, right? So before you do your budget for the next month, and you are doing it for the first time, you have set your goals, consult your bank statements, your receipts, your credit card statements for records of your expenditures. How have you been spending your money, right? Once you look at how you have been spending your money, compare it with the goals that you have set in step one, right? In step one, you came up with goals. You will, in most cases, you will actually see that if you continue spending your money the way you are spending your money, you are not going to go there. So once you've got those insights, you then do a budget for the next month, which takes into account the realities of where you are, but makes provision for you to get to where you would want to go. Right. Then step number 3 in budgeting 101 would then be to track your budgeting, right? Track your budgeting and do it with the discipline. Say, for example, you have wanted to spend 15 rands on a particular spending category. If you have reached that amount of money and that's what your tracking is revealing, then don't overspend. Then there is no money for it. Tafadzo, you would know one of my principles: if it's not budgeted for, we cannot spend it, right? Get that statement, right? If it's not budgeted for, sometimes my children sometimes ask me for things based on probably what other children that they are friends to are buying. Then I say to them, it's not in the budget. So get into the habit of saying, if it's not budgeted for, the expense does not exist and it cannot be incurred, because I'm guided by my budget. And if I reach what my budget says, so you need to get to that discipline there. So those are the 3 basic steps, Tafazo, that I would want to talk about, at least for the time being.
Thank you for that. I see Mnyerazi says he has bought the book. That's encouraging, Mnyerazi. Well done.
So that's somebody who is actioning. I like the actioning part of it. You bought the book. It's really a good book. It's really a good book for those reasons. Nick is a data person, and most of his arguments are informed by evidence. All right, yes, Tafadzo.
Can you describe in simple your suggested method of budgeting? I'm not sure whether you've already done that. And if so, what are some of the common budgeting pitfalls and how can they be avoided?
So I like spreadsheets, Tafadzwa. I was trained to use spreadsheets. So what I'm presenting there is a simple spreadsheet, right? So the way you, so when you are budgeting, I advise people to live below their means. And my basic advice is if you get 100 rands, make sure that your total expenses do not exceed 80 rands. We call that living below your means. So if there are three principles that inform budgeting 101, or the way I would want us to do budgeting, or the term that I have coined reverse budgeting. Principle number one, live below your means. You earn 100 rands, your expenses should not be more than 80 rands. Principle number two, pay yourself first. Principle number three, if it's not budgeted for, the expense does not exist. So now that you've got 80 rands, you earn 100 rands, then you budget for the necessities. Remember what I said. Generally, poor people spend their money on necessities. There are certain necessities that are, essential. So if you are working, you have to go to work, you budget for transport. You budget for your necessities. If you look at this budget, there is something called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I like the concept of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it talks about how people progress from basic needs to higher order needs, as they, get more empowered in life and as they get resources. So you'll see here that my budgeting categories that I have on this spreadsheet are aligned to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I like a budgeting process that is sensitive to where people are in their journey. So what you'll see is that if you are very poor, most of your expenses will go to those physiological and safety needs. Make sure that's catered for. So you can't indulge in luxury or in esteem needs, but obviously as you get more money, and that becomes very, very true that people who are well off spend less on necessities. So the research that has been done is pointing out to people that have got resources, they spend much, much less. That's why Patrice Motsepe is not worried about electricity around basic needs. He still budgets, but his budget is mostly around self-actualization needs. It's just got to do with where one is along that journey. You also asked the question around what are some of the budgeting pitfalls. There are three pitfalls that I would want to talk about. Number one, over-indebtedness. As you go along your financial journey, don't accumulate more debt than is necessary. Yes, debt could be good in certain instances, so you need to manage that debt. That's why on my spreadsheet, I've got an indicative ratio there, debt to disposable income ratio. Manage your debt, right? So that's a pitfall there. So as you accumulate debt, we will all need to accumulate debt in our journey at some point. Imagine when you want to buy a house and you are progressing the way normal people would progress. So that becomes one pitfall. Manage that within acceptable threshold. The second pitfall is uncertainties. So provide for contingencies in your budget, provide for contingencies. Not everything will happen according to your plan because there are things that might actually happen. So provide for contingencies, always have an emergency fund to cater for those uncertainties, things that may happen. Then the other thing that you need, which is a budgeting pitfall that we need to watch out for, is unnecessary expenses. We all have things that and habits that we are accustomed to. For example, I used to love Chicken Licken, the wings that are sold at Chicken Licken. And sometimes, I would find myself driving to a Chicken Licken outlet and just spending and spending. When I accumulated all that spending, it became quite significant. I no longer go to those places because I now have got a different lifestyle, eating lifestyle. But one of the budgeting pitfalls that we need to be aware of is unnecessary expenses. There are all these little holes that are there in our finances that we need to be mindful of. We need to be very careful about all those small expenses that may accumulate to large amounts of money because we are spending on a daily basis. And so it comes when we watch our habits. But in our budget, we need to provide over time for investments and generating investment income, because that's very, very important. Tafadzwa, I see that we are over an hour. Maybe we can continue with this discussion next week, focusing on how to grow your income, because that's very important. By the way, we can also focus on this same book, because Nick has got ideas of growing your income. But the biggest personal finance lie that he talks about is the lie that says you can grow wealthy by managing your budget and cutting your expenses. He says, no, you grow wealthy by growing your income. And there's a reason why poor people stay poor. And therefore, we need to be mindful of that. If you need to get hold of me, the easiest way to get hold of me is to go on my LinkedIn page. That's just type on LinkedIn, Themba Duplex Mazibuko, and you communicate to me via LinkedIn. Over to you, Tafadzwa.
Thank you very much, Themba, for your time, for the contribution, and thank you for everyone who's joined us. I saw Linda, Tabisang, Mnyarazi, just to mention a few that I'm remembering. And Mnyarazi, thank you for buying the book. That's an encouragement. At least we know someone is acting on what is being shared on the platform. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and let's grow together. And I hope during the week we'll work on our budgeting style, skills, and start setting goals so that we start implementing. If you want to get hold of us, you can write an email to Tafadzwa, tafadzwamazibukospeaks.co.za, or you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, That Dream That I Was Worth Fighting For. We love hearing from you, and thank you for joining us. Have a great week ahead, and cheers.